The Ozark Mountains in spring were alive with sound. Birds called from the thick canopy above, and the soft rush of a nearby creek filled the air with a calming rhythm. I'd never been this deep into the wilderness before. I was used to the flat, sprawling plains of Lawrence, Kansas, where the roar of engines from street races was a constant backdrop to my nights. Fixing cars and driving them fast was my thing, but this trip? This was supposed to be a break from all that. The hunting trip had been Carl's idea. He was one of my training buddies at the MMA gym, always talking about how nature was the ultimate test of endurance and focus. A few days in the Ozarks will toughen you up in ways a ring never could, he'd said, slapping me on the back. Along with Carl, there was Tyler, a quiet guy with a knack for tracking, and Marcus, whose boisterous laugh had already echoed through the trees more times than I could count. We were a strange mix, but that's what made it fun, at least at first. The weather was perfect. The sky was a pale blue, and the air carried the faint scent of wildflowers and damp earth. We set up camp near a clearing surrounded by dense woods, the kind of place where sunlight struggled to reach the ground. It was calm, almost too calm. As the hours ticked by, the usual chatter of the forest seemed to fade. Even Marcus, who couldn't stay quiet for 5 minutes, started to notice. "You ever hear of the Ozarks being famous for weird stuff?" Marcus asked as we sat around the fire that evening. He leaned in, his voice low, as if the trees were listening. "You know, creatures and all that?" Tyler scoffed. "You mean Bigfoot? That's all tourist crap." But Marcus wasn't laughing. "Not Bigfoot. Something different." I didn't say anything, but I'd read about strange sightings in these parts, stories of shadowy figures and unnatural howls that haunted the woods at night. I brushed it off then, chalking it up to overactive imaginations. But now, sitting by the fire with darkness pressing in on all sides, those stories didn't feel so far-fetched. The first encounter happened just as we were getting ready to turn in for the night. Tyler was the first to notice something off. He froze, his eyes narrowing as he stared into the woods. "You hear that?" he whispered. I strained my ears but heard nothing at first. Then it came, a faint rustling, followed by a low, guttural growl. It was deep, almost like the purr of an engine, but far more primal. My stomach knotted. "What the hell was that?" Marcus muttered, gripping his flashlight. The noise came again, louder this time, and closer. A shadow moved between the trees, too fast and too fluid to be human. We all stood, weapons in hand, knives, a hatchet, even a metal tent stake Carl had grabbed in his panic. The shadow stopped just outside the firelight, and for a moment the woods went silent. Then it screamed. The sound was inhuman, a mix of a howl and a screech that sent chills racing down my spine. My instincts kicked in, the same instincts that had saved me in countless fights. "Back to back," I said, my voice steady despite the fear clawing at my chest. The shadow moved again, circling us, its growl echoing through the woods. We couldn't see it clearly, just flashes of fur, glimpses of something tall and hunched. The firelight flickered, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to mock us. "Rugaru," Tyler whispered, his voice barely audible. I shot him a glance, and he nodded. "It's in the stories. Something like a werewolf, but worse. Hungrier." I didn't know if I believed him, but I didn't have time to argue. The creature lunged, its form breaking into the light for a split second, enough to see claws, teeth, and eyes that burned with a feral intelligence. Marcus swung his flashlight like a club, connecting with a sickening thud. The creature recoiled, snarling, before disappearing into the darkness. "Move!" I shouted. We couldn't stay. The thing was toying with us, and I had no intention of waiting for it to get serious. We left the fire burning, grabbing only what we could carry. The woods were a labyrinth, the trees pressing in on all sides as we stumbled through the undergrowth. The creature followed, its growls and footfalls haunting us at every turn. At one point, it slammed into Carl, sending him sprawling. He screamed as its claws raked across his arm, but Tyler dragged him up, and we kept moving. The plan was simple. Stay quiet, stay together, and find a way out. Easier said than done. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves sent our nerves spiraling. The creature was relentless, its presence a constant weight on our backs. At one point, we hid beneath the roots of a massive tree, its gnarled limbs forming a natural shelter. We held our breath as the creature passed mere feet away, its shadow massive and menacing in the moonlight. I remembered my dad teaching me to stay calm under pressure, his voice steady as he showed me how to fix a stubborn engine. That memory grounded me, kept me from losing it entirely. Finally, after what felt like hours, we reached the edge of the woods. The first hints of dawn were breaking, painting the sky in shades of gray and pink. Our cars were parked just beyond the tree line, their metal frames glinting in the weak light. We didn't stop running until we were inside, the doors locked and the engines roaring to life. As we sped away, I caught one last glimpse of the creature. It stood at the edge of the woods, its form half hidden by shadows. Those eyes, burning and unblinking, followed us until we were out of sight. Carl's wounds weren't fatal, but they were bad enough to leave scars, a permanent reminder of what we'd faced. None of us talked about it afterward. What could we say? That we'd been hunted by a creature from legend? That we'd barely escaped with our lives? The Ozarks are beautiful in spring, but I'll never go back. Some places are better left untouched. The Ozark Mountains stretched wide and wild beneath the summer sky. The dense green of the forest seemed to stretch forever, broken only by the occasional rocky outcropping or glimmer of a hidden stream. The air was thick with the scent of pine and the low hum of insects, and the heat of the day pressed down like a weight. I didn't mind it much. Growing up in Lawrence, Kansas, I'd gotten used to sticky summers and the way the heat could turn a cracked driveway into a shimmering mirage. But this was a different kind of wilderness altogether. The trip had been organized by a local travel agency, one of those get-away-from-it-all kind of packages that promised rustic charm and a break from modern life. I'd signed up on a whim. Delivering packages all day in town was a grind, and I needed a change of scenery. Besides, the idea of a cabin tucked away in the Ozarks had a certain appeal. A few days disconnected from everything. What could go wrong? The group was an eclectic mix. There was Monica, the adventurous photographer always chasing the perfect shot. Greg, a quiet man who worked as an accountant and seemed out of place in the wild. And Jess, the agency rep who was supposed to make sure everything ran smoothly. She carried an air of forced cheerfulness, the kind that hinted she'd dealt with more than a few uncooperative clients. Then there was me, Damien Cavell, the guy who built computers in his spare time but couldn't tell poison ivy from a fern. The cabin was larger than I'd expected, with a wraparound porch and a fire pit out back. The first day passed uneventfully. We explored the trails near the cabin, cooked dinner over an open flame, and told dumb jokes as the sun dipped below the horizon. The woods were calm, almost unnaturally so, and the only sound that broke the stillness was the occasional rustle of leaves. It was the second night when things started to feel off. Jess had built a fire and we were sitting around it, the flames casting flickering shadows on the trees. Monica was showing us her photos from the day, close-ups of mushrooms, a deer she'd spotted near the creek, when Greg froze mid-laugh. "Did you hear that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The group fell silent, straining to listen. At first, there was nothing but the crackle of the fire. Then it came. A low, guttural growl that seemed to roll out of the darkness. It was faint, but unmistakable, and it sent a shiver racing down my spine. "Probably just a coyote," Jess said, though her voice lacked conviction. I wanted to believe her, but there was something in that sound that didn't sit right. It was too deep, too deliberate, like whatever made it wanted to be heard. We dismissed it as nerves and went to bed, though sleep didn't come easily. The cabin creaked and groaned in the night, and every noise outside seemed amplified in the silence. At one point, I thought I heard heavy footsteps, but when I peeked through the window, there was nothing there. The attack came on the third night. We'd just finished dinner and were sitting around the fire again when the calm was shattered by a loud crash. Something had slammed into the side of the cabin with enough force to rattle the windows. We jumped to our feet, hearts pounding, as a second crash followed. Jess grabbed a flashlight and shone it into the trees, but the beam of light caught only swaying branches. "Stay close," she said, her voice tight. The growl came again, louder this time, and closer. My stomach twisted as a shadow moved just beyond the edge of the firelight. It was massive, hunched, and impossibly fast. Monica screamed as it lunged into the clearing, its eyes glowing like embers in the firelight. It was shaped like a man, but covered in matted fur, its long limbs ending in claws that gleamed in the dark. The creature snarled, its teeth bared in a twisted grin, and swiped at Monica, who stumbled backward, narrowly avoiding its claws. Greg swung a log from the fire pit, connecting with a sickening crunch, but the creature barely flinched. "Run!" Jess shouted. We bolted, the creature hot on our heels. The woods were a blur as we tore through the underbrush, branches snagging at our clothes. I could hear the thing behind us, its heavy breaths and the snap of twigs under its weight. My mind raced, searching for a way out. We stumbled into a dry creek bed and took cover behind a cluster of rocks. Jess pressed a hand to Monica's mouth to muffle her sobs, while Greg clutched the log like it was his lifeline. The creature prowled above us, its low growls vibrating through the ground. I remembered hearing rumors about something like this, a dogman, people called it, but I'd always dismissed it as folklore. Now, faced with the reality, I wished I hadn't been so quick to laugh it off. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The creature eventually moved on, its growls fading into the distance, but none of us dared move. When we finally emerged, the forest was eerily quiet. The moonlight filtered through the trees, casting long shadows that danced with every step. We made our way back to the cabin, grabbing only the essentials before setting out for the nearest town. The creature returned twice, each time lunging from the shadows before retreating, as if it was playing with us. By the time we reached the edge of the forest, we were battered and bleeding, but alive. The town was a blur of lights and noise after the suffocating silence of the woods. We didn't talk about what had happened, not to the locals, not to each other. What could we say that wouldn't make us sound insane? The Ozarks had promised a break from reality, and they delivered. Just not in the way I'd expected. The Pacific Northwest had a way of feeling alive, almost sentient. Its forests sprawled endlessly, a labyrinth of ancient pines and moss-covered rocks. The rain had been falling in a steady rhythm since morning, soaking the ground and painting everything in shades of deep green and gray. I leaned forward over the steering wheel, the wipers slapping against the windshield, trying to make out the winding road ahead. Summer was supposed to mean sunshine, but up here, the seasons seemed to have their own rules. I'd left Poughkeepsie a week ago, itching for a change of pace. Fixing cars had always been my thing, hands deep in grease, coaxing engines back to life, but even that had started to feel monotonous. Gym training had become my outlet, the one place where I could channel the restless energy that seemed to buzz under my skin. But after years of the same routine, I needed more than barbells and bench presses. I needed to get out. The Pacific Northwest seemed like a good choice, wild and untamed, far removed from the predictable streets of home. The plan was simple: drive, camp, clear my head. I'd heard plenty about the region's cryptic allure, stories of shadowy figures and things that lurked just out of sight. But I wasn't the kind of guy who spooked easily. Still, as I pulled into a small clearing to set up camp for the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was watching me. The rain eased to a drizzle as I built a fire, the flames sputtering against the damp air. I set up my tent and sat by the fire, eating a can of lukewarm beans. The quiet was oppressive. Back home, there was always some kind of noise: sirens, neighbors yelling, cars roaring down the street. Here, the silence pressed in like a weight. The only sounds were the occasional drip of water from the trees and the crackle of the fire. It wasn't long before I began to notice something else. The woods weren't just quiet, they were too quiet. No birds, no rustle of small animals in the underbrush, just nothing. My thoughts wandered to the stories I'd read about this place. legends of strange, pale creatures stalking the forests, their hunger insatiable, their eyes glowing faintly in the dark. They called them Rugaru, though descriptions varied. Some said they were like wolves, others claimed they were men twisted into beasts by some ancient curse. I shook my head, laughing softly to myself. I didn't believe in that kind of thing. The first sign came just before midnight. I was tossing another log onto the fire when I heard it, a low, guttural growl that seemed to echo from the trees. I froze, every muscle in my body tensing. The sound was unlike anything I'd heard before, deep and wet, almost like a snarl mixed with a gurgle. I grabbed the flashlight from my bag and swept the beam across the forest. The trees loomed like silent sentinels, their trunks slick with rain, but I saw nothing. I told myself it was just an animal, maybe a bear or a mountain lion. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, circling just beyond the light. The fire seemed smaller now, its glow barely enough to hold back the dark. Then I saw it. A flash of movement between the trees. It was quick, almost too quick to register, but I caught enough to know it wasn't a bear. It moved upright, hunched, but unmistakably human in shape, though far too large. My stomach churned as the growl came again, closer this time. I scrambled for my knife, the cold steel reassuring in my hand. The creature stepped into view just at the edge of the firelight, and I felt my breath catch. It was tall, its pale skin stretched tight over a skeletal frame. Its eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the firelight like molten gold. Long claws tipped its hands, and its mouth was filled with jagged teeth, slick with saliva. It didn't charge, it just stood there watching me, its head cocked like a predator toying with its prey. My heart thundered in my chest as I backed toward the car. I'd left the keys in the ignition, a habit born from years of rushing between deliveries, and prayed the engine would start. The creature moved, disappearing into the trees with a speed that defied logic. I jumped into the car and turned the key. The engine roared to life, and I floored it, the tires kicking up mud as I sped down the dirt road. My eyes darted to the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the thing chasing me. The rain picked up again, turning the road into a slick mess. I gripped the wheel tightly, trying to focus, but my mind was racing. The stories weren't just stories. The Rugaru was real, and it was hunting me. The creature appeared again, this time on the side of the road, its glowing eyes cutting through the rain like twin lanterns. It swiped at the car as I passed, its claws screeching against the metal. My heart leapt into my throat, and I pushed the gas pedal harder, the car skidding as it struggled to find traction. I don't know how long I drove, the forest a blur of shadow and rain. Eventually, the road straightened and the trees thinned. Lights appeared in the distance, small, warm, and impossibly welcoming. A town. I didn't slow down until I reached the main street, pulling into the parking lot of a diner. I sat in the car for a long time, shaking, unable to process what had just happened. The rain drummed against the roof, a steady reminder that the forest was still out there, vast and unknowable. I called a friend, my voice trembling as I tried to explain what had happened. He didn't believe me, of course, who would? But I knew what I'd seen. The stories were true, and the Pacific Northwest was hiding something far more terrifying than anyone could imagine.